tomorrow in the most important election of our lifetimes.
I think this is going to be the most important election in the history of our country.
This election is not only the most important of our lives.
And this election is the most important election of our lifetime.
Well, look, I think this is the most important election since Abraham Lincoln.
The former president regularly praised Adolf Hitler.
A communist known as Kamala Harris is a communist.
Trump is an authoritarian, does not believe in the rule of law.
Fascists. They are fascists.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
They're a threat to our very democracy.
Most radical left person ever to run for office.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do.
The president calling Republican ideology, quote, semi-fascism.
This is a more important election than the last one, and I never thought I'd say it.
It is one of the most important in the life of our nation.
I know we say it a lot, and it's been true, but not as true as it is now.
But this one's more important.
It seems like every 2 or 4 years, the future of our entire country hinges on Election Day. If we were to believe our political leaders and the media apparatus that props them up, then the average American will live through roughly 20 democracy-defining presidential elections in their lifetime. Twice that many if you count midterms, and that's to say nothing of the countless local elections that take place at any given time in communities all over the country. I have been a professional political consultant for more than 10 years. I remember when I was first starting my career, I asked my boss what we did during years where there were no elections. She said, "There is always an election around the corner." Turns out, she was right. Political tensions in any country are visibly heightened during election years, but as our national political landscape has started to take on many of the same aspects of celebrity gossip culture, it's no surprise that the political season is now year-round and in many ways never-ending. There is no presidential election in 2025, for example, but I think you would be hard-pressed to find anyone who truly thinks that the onslaught of political news has decreased in any meaningful way since Election Day more than 6 months ago. This, as many of us have come to sense, is not an accident. You probably don't need a professional political strategist to tell you, but the never-ending chaos, the pile of political emergencies that continues to grow, is not only a deliberate, long-term strategy, it's a highly focused, highly effective one. In 2018, then White House strategist Steve Bannon said in a Bloomberg interview with Michael Lewis that he, quote, viewed the media as the real opposition and that the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit.
Flood the zone was my idea. If you go back and look at the PBS thing, I'm sitting there going, yeah, we're going to flood the zone. We have like 2 or 3 things every day, right? It's a misdirection play. Hell, we got 12 or 15 every day now.
The idea here being, if you simply overwhelm our system of mass information processing with too much information, the gears that keep the entire news machine humming along will simply break down and collapse under their own weight. In the case of the 24-hour news cycle, the play from Bannon's perspective was that if you overload this institution with an unmanageable amount of emergency-level breaking news, then no single event, no single tweet, no single policy proposal, real or fictional, will be able to sustain focus long enough for any journalist to make sense of it. It's impossible to know if Bannon intended on this strategy working as well on the American public at large as it has worked on the media, but as evidenced by the last 9 years of national politics, it's easy to see that this intentional flooding the zone with chaos has trickled down into our everyday lives. And while this strategy is certainly deliberate, when mixed with a hypersensitive outrage culture that defines much of the online experience, it has taken on a life of its own, one that seems almost impossible to put the brakes on. Writing for Vox, columnist Sean Illing summed it up nicely. Quote, "We live in a media ecosystem that overwhelms people with information. Some of that information is accurate, some of it is bogus, and much of it is intentionally misleading. The result is a polity that has increasingly given up on finding the truth. So that begs the question, what do you get when you mix an intentional, overwhelming amount of political news with a largely unregulated ecosystem of information outlets, and you put it in palms of everyone's hands, ready to be accessed at any moment of the day? The answer is pretty simple. You get chaos, the kind that feels like it can tear down the entire country at any given moment. That has been true now for at least a decade, in some ways much longer. But this has another prolonged effect on our collective subconscious too. It tires us out. It's meant to. When outrage is the product, fatigue is the point. The reason you're exhausted isn't just because the world is crazy and rapidly getting crazier. It's because you've been baited into caring about everything, all the time, often with equal weight. But how long can you stay angry? There are a lot of powerful people betting that the answer is not forever. And that's what makes the flood the zone strategy so insidious. When everything is a 5-alarm fire, nothing is. If there are 20 political emergencies happening at once, each one potentially worth marching in the streets over, guess what happens? You burn out before the march even makes it to the end of the block. You give up, and in time, you become numb. This is not just true on the individual level either. It has become the defining characteristic of recent popular movements within months of their inception, making any single movement essentially dead on arrival. Even the most politically active citizens can't keep everything at a fever pitch forever. During my decade in politics, I've watched people build careers on public anger and lose them just as fast. I've seen otherwise righteous movements go viral one day only to implode the next, not because their cause was unworthy, but because they tried to sprint through a marathon. They take on too much, and eventually they become just another movement reacting to everything and ultimately focusing on nothing. If someone ever tries to get you to join their cause and their stated goal is to spread awareness, you can reasonably assume that the group in question is rapidly approaching this dead end. Since 2016, the Democratic Party has mostly drifted from one moral panic to another, struggling to define itself by what it's for, not just what it's against. That's not an accident. That's what happens when your only fuel is endless reaction. So if you recently found yourself wondering how a leading presidential candidate's entire campaign slogan can just be brat, well, there's your answer. Under the hood, the Republican Party is no different. There really is no long-lasting, cohesive strategy in the party aside from just being anti-woke, which is now becoming painfully obvious with Trump's ill-conceived tariff war. When the global economic strategy is based solely on how it will vibe with the base, that tends to not have good long-term benefits for the rest of us. Just ask your 401k. But most regular working Americans can't afford to be jostled around by political emergency after political emergency for too long. Most of us have jobs and a life we have to tend to. Eventually, most people just throw up their hands and decide they don't know what to believe anymore. Some of those people fill the void with whatever conspiracy theory hits their feeds most often. Most others simply tune out. And if it isn't becoming obvious by now, that's the point. There's long been a discussion in social psychology circles about the implicit debate between George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World about what type of dystopia we are heading towards, or by some accounts already in. Will it be the 1984 style surveillance state where fear and force are our oppressors? Or will it be Huxley's portrayal of pleasure and comfort that will keep us hopelessly pacified? As with all things, the reality seems to be much more complicated. It's a little of both, and at the same time, neither. Because right now, our oppressor is our outrage. Outrage that makes us feel righteous while robbing us of true political power in any practical sense. And instead of this outrage cycle feeding anything resembling a singular, coherent, popular movement, it instead feeds an algorithm just long enough until the current crisis is relegated to the ash heap of last week's horrors, and the cycle starts again. Crisis, rage, scroll, share, signal boost, repeat. How many times can you repeat this cycle? More to the point, how many times will you repeat this cycle? When the act of expressing anger becomes a stand-in for the act of doing anything tangible, much less anything sustainable, then we can see the flood the zone with chaos strategy in full view. The cycle feels like momentum. It feels like action until it becomes so cumbersome that no human mind can possibly hold it all in at once. And so it eventually fades. Because when everything is an emergency, nothing is. When every election is the election of our lifetimes, none of them are. When every policy you disagree with is synonymous with literal fascism, you're already in a cage. We so often look back on images of Nazi-occupied Europe or the fall of Rome and try to glean some kind of clarity into the calamity we all feel like we are heading towards. It's only natural. But the reality is stranger than anything Orwell or Huxley could have dreamt up. In the 21st century, the real danger is not if democracy will be stolen by the barrel of a gun or fade away under a sea of sense pleasure. The real danger is that it will be hollowed out from the inside, not from apathy, but from overstimulation. This is the destructive genius of flooding the zone with shit. You don't have to win. You just have to grind people down into a state of functional paralysis. So you might be rightfully thinking that the antidote to this is just to refuse to play the game entirely. But this isn't a call for apathy. This moment in history calls for much more. Our collective future can't afford apathy. This is, however, a call to pick your battles. It's a call for radical accountability. In Zen Buddhism, there is a famous koan from the Book of Serenity where two monks are plowing a field discussing Buddhism. In typical Zen koan fashion, the story itself is meant to be used as a meditation tool, not to be answered logically. But the last two lines struck me as being particularly prescient for our current political predicament. One monk asks, "What to do about the world?" The other responds, "What do you call the world?" Koans are meant to be interpreted in many different ways, but I think the response here is a call for perspective, to zoom out and view the bigger picture. Zen priest Peg Syverson, when giving a talk about this same koan, summed it up nicely. Quote, "We thought we knew what the world was. We engaged in extensive discussions about it, in fact. What we were missing that is obvious now that the ground has disappeared from beneath our feet. What were we plowing with? The tongue, the pen, the computer keyboard, the smartphone screen? Now we are like the mendicant monks, watching a white ox gazing, not paying attention to the grass." Our outrage will not be our salvation. Our collectivism will not change the world or raise awareness or lay a foundation for systemic change. It will tire out, spin its wheels, and like the endless onslaught of political emergencies that it is in reaction to, it will be relegated to the ash heap of last week's chaos in a flash. So how then do we confront the everything crisis in a way that is sustainable long enough for anything to actually get done? Maybe we take a cue from the Buddhist monk who asks, "What do you call the world?" In other words, maybe we stop reacting and start reframing. We need to think strategically, not just emotionally, about the issues boiling our blood. That means asking what actually matters most. That means triage, the way an ER nurse knows to treat internal bleeding before a broken finger. Apply that same logic to political outrage. Will Elon Musk's Roman salute bring about the end of the American project as we know it? What about a hot war with China over Taiwan, or a nuclear conflict between Israel and Iran? If you have to wonder which of these should command more of your attention, I would recommend injecting a little more political strategy into your outrage. I can guarantee it will go further. Think about where your red line actually is. What would have to happen to get you to literally quit your job, take up arms, and march in the streets? This answer will be different for everyone. But if we are truly asking ourselves if we are sliding into an authoritarian dictatorship, then it is precisely the question we need to be asking. And if you can't come up with a scenario that extreme, then maybe what you call the world has already been decided for you.